They laughed at Elias Mercer long before the first snow fell, and they did it openly without shame, as if mocking him were a kind of town sport. While the rest of the Dakota settlement raised proud, wooden houses with steep roofs, and tall windows meant to catch the sun, Elias chose the opposite. He dug into the earth. Every morning before dawn, he carried his shovel to the edge of town and disappeared into a growing pit. The sound of metal striking frozen soil echoing through the cold air. Children pointed and giggled. Men leaned against fences, shaking their heads, calling him broken, calling him mad. Some said grief had hollowed him out after his wife's death, that a man who buried love once could not fear burying himself. Others joked that he was building his own grave early, saving the town the trouble when winter finally claimed him. Elias heard every word. He never answered. His hands kept working, his breath rising in slow, steady clouds, his eyes focused on the ground, as if it were speaking a language only he could understand. He remembered another winter, decades earlier when he was still a boy. The elders had warned them that the land did not forgive arrogance. Snow had buried wagons, crushed roofs, and swallowed people whole. Elias had survived only because his father had listened to those warnings and built low, thick walls that hugged the earth. The memory never left him, not when winters grew mild, not when people began to believe the plains had softened. By late autumn, Elias's underground home was complete. Thick timbers reinforced the walls. Packed clay sealed every crack. A layer of sod covered the roof, blending it into the land itself. Inside it was narrow but solid, stocked with dried meat, grain, and jars of rendered fat. An iron stove sat at the center, its chimney cleverly angled to release smoke without bleeding warmth. When Elias lit the first fire, the space filled with a quiet, comforting heat that felt like a promise. The town came to look, curiosity replacing mockery for a moment. They laughed again when they saw how small it was. No windows, no porch, no pride. Elias said nothing as they walked away, already certain he would freeze underground like a trapped animal. That night the wind shifted. It carried a sharpness that made even seasoned men uneasy. Snow began to fall before dawn, early and heavy, smothering the ground in silence. People shrugged it off, calling it nothing more than a stubborn storm. Elias sealed his door, sat by his fire, and listened to the earth above him grow restless, knowing the winter he feared had finally decided to return. The blizzard did not arrive gently, nor did it give warning enough for second thoughts. It struck the town like a living thing, fierce and deliberate, as if the plains themselves had turned hostile. The wind rose first, screaming through the streets and tearing at shutters until nails shrieked loose. Snow followed thick and blinding, driven sideways with such force that it stung exposed skin like shattered glass. Within hours, the world beyond a few feet vanished, swallowed by white. Families barricaded themselves indoors, stuffing rags into window cracks and piling furniture against doors. Fires were fed greedily, but the cold seemed to watch and wait, creeping closer with every passing hour. Chimneys clogged with ice. Flames sputtered, then died. When night fell, it came early and absolute, smothering the town beneath a darkness broken only by the groans of strained wood and the distant crash of collapsing roofs. Underground, Elias sat alone, listening. The earth around him muffled the storm into a deep, rolling thunder like the breathing of some massive beast. His walls held firm. The fire burned steady. The air stayed warm enough that his breath no longer fogged in front of him. Still, sleep would not come. He knew what that sound meant. He knew what this kind of cold did to people who trusted walls that stood too tall and foundations that rested too shallow. By the second day, desperation took shape. People tried to leave their homes, hoping to reach neighbors or the general store, only to vanish within steps of their doors. The wind erased footprints as soon as they were made. Shouts were torn apart before they could travel. Inside the houses, food dwindled. Water froze solid in buckets. Children cried until their voices went hoarse, then fell silent as the cold wrapped itself tighter around them. Late that night, Elias heard something that did not belong to the storm. A dull thud, then another. At first, he thought it was the wind hurling debris. But the sound came again, weaker, almost pleading. He rose slowly, heart pounding, and pressed his ear to the sealed door. Beneath the roar of the blizzard, he caught it, a human voice, thin and breaking, calling his name. Fear and resolve twisted together inside him. Opening the door meant inviting the storm in, risking everything he had built. Leaving it closed meant certain death for whoever stood outside. Elias pulled on his coat, banked the fire, and forced the door open just enough to slip through. The wind nearly knocked him flat. Snow clawed at his face, blinding him, burning his lungs with every breath. Just beyond his shelter lay three shapes half buried in drifting snow. A woman clutching a child, and behind them a man barely conscious, all of them shaking violently. Elias dragged them inside one by one, sealing the door again as the storm raged on, uncaring, relentless, and far from finished. When the blizzard finally loosened its grip, it did so without ceremony, as if it had grown bored of its own destruction. The wind faded into an uneasy hush, and the sky lightened from endless white to a dull, lifeless gray. Elias waited a full day before opening his door, listening for any sign that the storm might return. When he finally stepped outside, the cold hit him like a wall, sharp and unforgiving, but the violence was gone. What remained was worse. The town had vanished beneath towering drifts. Roofs jutted out at crooked angles, crushed and splintered. Streets no longer existed, replaced by rolling hills of snow that swallowed fences. Wagons and signs alike. Elias moved slowly, using a shovel to clear paths where he could, calling out though he already feared the answer. His voice sounded small in the vast silence, swallowed quickly by the open plain. He reached the nearest house and forced the door open with numb hands. Inside, the air was frozen solid. A family sat together on the floor, arms wrapped around one another, faces peaceful in a way that made his chest ache. Elias removed his hat and stood there longer than necessary, whispering a quiet apology to people who could no longer hear him. He closed the door gently and moved on. House after house told the same story. Fires burned down to cold ash. Beds were left untouched, as if sleep had been planned but never reached. In some places, desperation had clawed at the walls, splintered furniture, torn blankets, anything that might have offered one more hour of warmth. The storm had taken them all with the same indifferent patience. By dusk, Elias could no longer feel his feet. He returned underground, where the survivors waited in heavy silence. They watched his face, searching for hope he could not give freely. He counted them carefully. 7 souls had lived through the blizzard, each of them rescued by chance, timing, and a shelter they once mocked. The realization settled over the room like a weight. Some wept openly. Others stared into the fire, shame written plainly in their eyes. The blacksmith was the first to speak. His voice broke as he thanked Elias, words tumbling over each other, clumsy and sincere. No one laughed now. No one met Elias's gaze for long. Gratitude mixed with grief in the cramped space. And the fire crackled softly, the only sound brave enough to fill the void. Food was scarce, but Elias shared everything he had without hesitation. He showed them how to seal the door properly, how to ration heat, how to sleep close to the earth where warmth lingered. In the days that followed, they took turns venturing out, marking the dead, salvaging what little could be saved. Each trip reinforced the same truth. Survival had not been luck. It had been preparation, and the cost of ignoring winter's warnings lay frozen all around them. Spring did not arrive like a celebration. It came slowly, reluctantly, as if the land itself was unsure whether life deserved another chance. The snow softened, then sank into the earth, revealing what the blizzard had hidden. Broken homes, splintered beams, and the quiet evidence of a town that would never return to what it had been. Elias watched the thaw from the doorway of his underground home, his face lined not with pride, but with a deep, enduring weariness. Officials arrived weeks later, riding in from the south with ledgers and solemn expressions. They counted the dead, marked the land, and asked questions in careful voices. When they were shown Elias's shelter, they stood in silence, running gloved hands over the packed earth roof and the thick reinforced walls. One man shook his head slowly, unable to hide his disbelief. He asked Elias why he had chosen to live this way when everyone else had built. Above ground like civilized folk, Elias looked out across the ruins before answering. He spoke quietly, without bitterness. He said the plains had always spoken to those willing to listen, that winter never arrived without warning, only without mercy. He told them the earth was not something to rise above, but something to lean into when the sky turned cruel. The man wrote his words down, though it was clear he did not fully understand them. The 7 survivors chose to stay. Leaving felt like another kind of death, an abandonment of those who had not made it. Together with Elias, they began to rebuild, but not in the old way. Houses were set low, reinforced with sod and stone, half buried against the wind. Cellars were no longer afterthoughts, but the heart of every home. The underground shelter became their gathering place, a shared reminder of both loss and survival. Children born later would grow up hearing the story, though it changed with each telling. Some versions spoke of the storm as a curse, others as a test, but all of them spoke of the man who dug when others laughed, who trusted the land more than pride, and who opened his door when doing so could have cost him everything. Travelers carried the tale across the plains, from town to town, until it became a warning wrapped in legend. They laughed at his underground home, people would say, until the Dakota winter blizzard killed the town. Those who listened built differently. Those who didn't sometimes vanished, leaving only snow and silence behind. Elias never corrected the stories. He lived the rest of his life much as he always had, quietly, close to the earth, respectful of its power. When winter winds returned each year, they found a town that no longer dared to mock the ground beneath its feet, and a people who finally understood that survival was not about standing tall, but about knowing when to bow.